don't think
by
I want to talk. I don't think I want to talk to you anymore.
It has kind of rubbed off because it's evening by now. So,
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Do me a favor, Julia. Tell me something. I hear the word trauma bounced around quite a bit nowadays with the show that I do on Instagram, Narc Abuse TV show. I hear it quite often. I need you to give me some perspective about that word, trauma, the basis of that word, because it's often connected with narcissistic abuse, but there's trauma in itself is more than just about narcissistic abuse. What's the
absolutely.
background on the word trauma and what it means for the rest of us that are experiencing it or think that we're going through it?
So, first of all, I really like that the whole topic of trauma and traumatic experiences gets more into the consciousness of people. You know, people read more about it. I mean, it's only like 5 or 10 years back that regular people had no idea what you were talking about. They were like, okay, a rape might be a traumatic experience, but we had no understanding as a community that we all go through traumatic experiences. Trauma is part of life. It's unavoidable. You can't avoid traumatic experiences, period. Okay, so what we need to understand, trauma, that is something that most people do not yet understand. Trauma is not the event itself, but trauma is the response, is how your nervous system, how your resilience responds to the event.
So it's more about not really saying what happened. It's more about my reaction to what happened, if I understand you.
So there's people who can be overwhelmed by something that to you appears to be like a minor event, right? Because your biography has been different, your resilience is different, your resources are different, your strength is different. And then you might react to something like with total overwhelm, and another person goes like, I don't even know why he's freaking out like that. So we can't say that this event per se is traumatic. Obviously, there's violence, there's war, this kind of stuff that we know that is traumatic. I'm not talking about that, right? But the basics of trauma are, it's too fast, it's too much, and it's a perceived threat that we cannot escape or fight. So that's important. It's a perceived threat. I subjectively perceive that as a threat. Okay, to my integrity, to my well-being, to my health, to my whatever, right? But too much is coming in too quick.
Of the perceived threat. Too much of the perceived threat is coming in too fast, too quick in order to process it. So it's overwhelming.
Exactly.
Maybe overwhelming to you, but not to me. But that doesn't mean I can discount it and say, well, that's nothing and you should get over it, because you're needing to process it.
Exactly. That's absolutely, we can absolutely not do that, because subjectively to that person, it's been overwhelming. So that means that person's nervous system, because again, trauma and trauma response is a response of our nervous system. The psyche comes later. It's really our body that reacts to perceived threat. So although you thought that was like a minor event, it might be traumatic to me, and I might suffer from consequences. You know, I might suffer from accelerated heart rate, from sleeplessness, from all kinds of stuff. Although to you, you had different resources, you had a different level of resilience, and you were able to process a similar event that I wasn't able to process. So when we mean it well, but when we tell people, oh, come on, just get over it. It's like, we are totally missing that person's reality. And what we need in order to overcome trauma, let's put it like that for now, is someone being empathetic, someone we feel safe with, because in that moment we did not feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if I now tell my friend, oh, come on, get over it,
Mm-hmm.
that person is not going to feel safe and seen and heard, right? But if I manage to step back, and if I manage to go like, okay, I have no idea why, but for you, that was overwhelming. That was just too much going on.
Right.
In that safe space, that person can start to process, even if you're not a professional, even if you're not a therapist, just being there, being offering a safe connection, mm-hmm. that person can start to process that overwhelm that was experienced in that moment, right?
That means that if it happens to me and I'm trying to process it, you're my friend and you're there, then I can start to measure the trauma out so I can process it instead of feeling overwhelmed. I can kind of step back a little bit and start to look at things. Even though I feel overwhelmed in the moment, by you being there and being empathetic, I'm able to have some space to be able to understand what's happening.
It's not even that much a mental understanding.
Okay.
It's more of a discharging. It's more of a physical processing.
Okay.
And we know if someone's there right in the moment. Mm-hmm. So for example, there's a car accident. A car accident is a typical traumatic experience that many people go through in their lives, right? So for example, there's a car accident, mm-hmm. and you are injured, and someone sits down with you and goes like, I'm not going to leave you alone. I'll be with you until the ambulance comes. Mm-hmm. We know that it can be a total stranger. Mm-hmm. But what happens is that someone's looking after me. I'm not alone. And it helps the nervous system to process. And we know that people who have that kind of support are way less likely to later suffer from consequences of the traumatic experience. So you stopping and just making sure that the other person realizes, hey, you're not alone. I'm not going to leave you alone until there's someone who takes care of you, is hugely important for that person's well-being after the traumatic event. Makes all the difference.
I am glad we're talking today. That makes a lot of sense. So we need to not necessarily be focused on mentally processing it or helping a friend to do that. But you say it's like a physical release or reaction? Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of neuroscience about it. There's a lot of details. What I can tell you in a nutshell is that in a moment of overwhelm, mm-hmm. our entire system goes back to the four absolute basic reactions, which is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. That's what any mammal does. Any mammal that gets attacked tries to fight. Once it realizes, oops, the perpetrator is stronger than I am, tries to flee. Mm-hmm. And when it can't flee, it freezes and fawns, right? It pretends to be dead. It's not even pretending to be dead, because pretending sounds like a decision, but it's not the animal deciding, oh, I better play dead. It's like the heart rate goes down, the respiratory system goes down, and it appears to be dead. Yeah, I mean, really. Yeah. And that's the basic survival instincts of all mammals. And we are still mammals. We function exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And if we can't complete fight or flight, then there's a high charge of energy that's stored in our nervous system. Because obviously you're in a moment of threat, and there's a lot of mobilization in your muscles, heart rate starts going up, and because you wanna fight the threat, right, or run real fast, right? But if we realize we can't, and now we are not living out in the wild, but we go into our office, we live with our family, threats are much more subtle than they used to be. Right? So your mom yells at you, if we take an example from children, for example, the mom loses it or the dad loses it, and you see how kids go into freeze, and fawn and please, but because they realize my parents stronger than I am, and there's no way I can flee. But what happens is that a high level of stress and fear energy is stored in the system, is stored in our bodies. And the body is not designed to live with that high level of stress and fear energy for a long time.
And that can become a lifestyle then. It can be like a second response to live that way, which again, it's not meant, the body's not meant to live like that. The body's not meant to function. But if we start to live that way, just curious to ask, what are some of the consequences if we start to live that way, where we're constantly in that state?
Well, I mean, everyone who's listening, and we can look into our own lives, and every one of us has a standard response. Okay. Someone's threatening you, you start arguing or you start pleasing. Just I, for example, I always try to find mutual ground. So my instant reaction would be to fawn and to please. Right? So, or to freeze and to fawn. So there usually there's, especially narcissists often go into fight. Right? They try to argue, they start speaking and don't stop, they try to overpower people or insult them or force things. But it's like every one of us has like this kind of standard response. And that is how you survived your childhood. That tells me a lot about
got it.
That childhood, because that's where you learned it. That's where we all learned it. So the safest response was, or the most intelligent response seemed to be, in order to save my own psyche and well-being and integrity, to freeze and fawn, or to fight, or to flight. And flight can be, to flee, can be to dissociate, right? To dissociate from what's going on. That's something you can see in many survivors of narcissistic abuse. They lack memory. They don't remember years or months of their life. It's a way of dissociating. It's a dissociation from what happened because it's just too much for our psyche to process. It's an accumulation of fear and stress energy that the body is not designed to live with. Because when you see the animals in the wild, once they survive the threat, they shake. They shake the stress off. They shake like, they shake their entire body. And then the nervous system, the energy level in the nervous system goes back to normal. And there they are, continue living. But they don't store. They process, they complete the cycle. The nervous system is at ease. There's a perpetrator, a threat. Stress level rises, and then they survive it, and then they shake it off, and they go back to normal. But we don't do that second part, right? And that leads to all kinds of stuff. We are only discovering that: migraine, fibromyalgia, high blood pressure, digestive issues, sleeping problems. I mean, there's few things that we cannot yet relate back to early intense trauma that has never been dealt with.
So the majority of those things can be connected to the early childhood trauma, including our reaction and what we do. Our natural response is because of the way we were surviving within a given generational or family setting.
Yeah.
And now we carry that into adulthood. But that doesn't mean that we really have the right survival skill if we never shake it off. If that trauma we're still carrying with us. We can carry the trauma.
It was adequate at that moment. At that moment,
Okay.
it was
I
the
see.
most intelligent way to survive.
Got it.
But now it's inadequate. Now it's not serving us. That's why you said a natural. We now have that natural response. Actually, we do not have a natural response. We are remote controlled.
Okay, got it.
We are
Okay.
remote controlled, and it's quite a journey to learn. I mean, just try to make a narcissist not fight. Yeah. It's like, okay, might not happen this lifetime. And
That
just
should be-
try for yourself to not fawn, to not freeze, to not please. Once you've done that for 40, 50, I don't know how many years,
Yeah,
right?
right. A few decades, and then now all of a sudden you're gonna flip that around and be this, and you're gonna stand up for yourself. That's going to be challenging.
And that's
Because-
exactly what's so important for survivors of narcissistic abuse, because we need to understand that in that dynamic, we have strengthened that knee-jerk reaction. We have strengthened and that pleasing, fawning, freezing, dissociating response. But to flip it and to go like, oh no, I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to fight for my right, for my integrity, for my well-being. We need to do some trauma work there.
Before we can really have that as a new life pattern or be able to strike a balance, there's some work that needs to be done, trauma work that needs to be done, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
But it can be done.
Strength. Oh yeah, absolutely. It can be done.
I'm sorry, you just said, but what did you just say before I cut you off? You said something about finding our strength. What?
Because if we don't do the trauma work that is necessary, and that work addresses something that is much, much older than your relationship with the narcissist, that addresses early childhood trauma. And before we don't address that in one way or the other, we can't tap into that strength, into that rootedness that we need if we want to fight. Because you can't be like all airy and half frozen and dissociated and fight. It's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
But in order to access that rootedness and that strength and that presence and that, hey, no bullshit, that people really get it by your energy, we need to do that early trauma work.
In order for someone else, let's say a narcissistic person or a behaviored person, for them to feel that you have and will stand your ground, you have stood your ground and you're going to continue to stand your ground, and the boundaries are indeed in effect, the drawbridge has been pulled up and you mean what you say, for that to happen, we have to do the work. We can't fake it.
No, because we can't fake it.
We can't fawn and fight. We're fooling ourselves. Right.
And the other one goes like, yeah, that's ridiculous. We've got to do the work, because otherwise there's all these beliefs like fears, I won't be loved. And, we need to address that developmental trauma, which is, just going to make that distinction real short here, which is different to shock trauma. Shock trauma, for example, is a car accident, is something that happens once, right? Some developmental trauma is something that happens in the first few years of your life, and it's trauma that happens in relationship to someone.
It's trauma that happens in relationship to someone, and that someone could be anyone, relatively speaking, a relative, it could be someone that has to do with our caretaking or something, or it has to
Exactly.
do with someone else.
Exactly.
Okay.
It usually, developmental trauma usually happens with our caretakers.
Okay.
Right. So, and how this has been, what we have experienced, and how this has been worked through or processed, is a blueprint to the relationships I will go into as an adult. It's a blueprint.
Okay, if it's a blueprint, that doesn't mean that it's a good blueprint or a bad blueprint, or is it always going to be a bad blueprint?
No, I'm not talking about good and bad.
It's just, it is a blueprint as to how we are going to start navigating other relationships based upon the blueprint from the caregiver.
Exactly.
The initial and primary caregiver, in other words.
Exactly. The blueprint, the experiences we made in the first 3-4 years of our life with the primary caregiver is determining, is like, that's how we will relate. Why? Because it's the only example we had.
Yeah.
You can read books and books and books and books and books, but if you don't work on the blueprint, if you don't work on that first memory, on that first experience and how it left you, how you felt alone, how you felt abandoned, how you felt not heard, not seen, needing to please in order to get love because love was conditional and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
If you don't go there, you can read 100 books, but it's not going to change much, right? Because we never reach the depth of it.
Nothing will change until we reach the depths of what we need to. And each person is different. That's different for each person. That can be painful though, right? For someone to take a look at that.
I would say, first of all, it is different for each person, and it's not. We know that can be a different conversation. We know that there's attachment styles.
Yes.
And we can find ourselves in one or the other attachment style or mix of it. So there is patterns. It's right. So there is similarities.
Got it.
And yes, I know from my own journey that when we go back and then when we feel that little girl that felt like totally left alone and totally not heard and totally not seen and needing to please because love was conditional. Yeah, in that moment, when we go back and feel that, it is painful. And it is a necessary step so that we, number one, develop compassion with our own biography. And number two, realize now as an adult, now I'm an adult, and now I don't need to please people for them to love me because I don't depend on their love. I did depend as a child, but now I can walk away. I can find other friends. But we need to go through those stages in order to realize, oh, wow, I can walk away. And there is people in my life who love me the way I am and who love me unconditionally. But that's part of the trauma bond that we speak about a lot in narcissistic and toxic relationships, that we feel, I'm not going to survive without that person.
Right.
But we are still operating on the level of a 3-year-old in that aspect.
But we're essentially, we're essentially not going to live as a child anymore, or accept love or give love as the child, in the sense that that person will abandon me. I need to chase their love, nor will we accept love as a child. Well, this must be love, even though they're abusing me. We start to do it, as you said just a moment ago, if I understand you correctly. And you got to correct me. I love it when you correct it. Just if I get it wrong, because you're the expert. So essentially, we could find ourselves living where we're acting as a child when it comes to love, but you're saying that we need to recognize that we are adults and that we can choose to find other friends. We can choose to not accept abuse as love. We don't have to continue to take the trauma in an adult life where we're always fawning over someone who is constantly fighting with us. I'm just throwing that out there to you, Julia.
Yeah. And what I would like to emphasize is that it's not a mental decision. It's not something we put stickers on our mirror and I'm not going to accept abuse anymore. Because the next time the person that you think you love insults you, you will take it again because you haven't done the work necessary. It's not a mental, it's not a positive thinking thing, you know. We don't reach the depth of our nervous system and therefore of our psyche with positive thinking or with affirmations. You know, we have to do the emotional work in order to, what I said before, to build that compassion, to go like, wow, this was intense what I had to go through. But once we have compassion, like we have compassion with our children, once we see, we don't put them through the same thing. And once we see for ourselves, we don't put ourselves through the same thing. But it's a felt, you know, it's a felt work. It's an emotional work. And if we stay in the mind, if we try to solve it mentally, it's
not going to work.
Doesn't have much of an effect.
It only has a temporary fix. It's not a long-term fix to try to psychologically, almost like a mathematical problem, numerically say, okay, you set a sticker up, or talk our way into this won't happen to me again. We have to lean into our nervous system and have our entire body in play so that
Absolutely.
we know exactly what we're feeling and what we're going through, and will not also allow our body to tolerate emotionally and energy wise, not to let that take place.
And you know, I'm sure many of the listeners can relate, because our minds tell us, oh, don't reach out again. Don't reply to this love bombing. We know it. We've read it. You know, we don't do it. It's just another hook.
Yeah,
Everything will start from scratch. Nothing's going to change.
Nothing
There you are, and you find yourself replying. Because as long as we haven't really rooted ourselves in, I don't need to do today, I don't need to do this anymore. Because today my survival does not depend on that person's love, because that's how children feel. And that's a reality for children. A child up to the age of 3, the survival depends on that primary caretaker. But there we are, 30, 40, 50 years old, and the intensity is the same as if we still depend on that abusive person.
As if we're still that 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Wow. That really means then we have to examine the way we're reacting in the moment as connected to how we were reacting as a child, if I understand you. And then we'll start maybe that process of doing the inner work. Because in other words, I'm trying to ask you this, Julia. How do we start the inner work?
Well, you know, it's always good to start reading a book. It's always good there's a lot of information on trauma, on attachment styles, and out there. If you can afford it, if you have access to therapy, and if you know a trauma-informed therapist best. I mean, to this day, I have a therapist I work with every 2 weeks. You know, it's like because it's an ongoing deepening. We need to unlearn unhealthy patterns. But once we unlearn, there we go in no man's land. You know, we go like no map, no idea how to do. What am I going to say? If I don't do this?
That's a show in itself. That's a whole nother landscape in
Oh,
which
yeah, exactly.
you don't know the boundaries. You don't really know what's under that rock or around that tree, around that corner. That could be in itself a sense of of intimidating to go through that. But it's got to be good to go through that though. I mean, what you're saying is just to unlearn these bad habits and go into this new landscape, new way of approaching things and relearning something, re-educating our nervous system in a different way. It's got to be a good thing though, right, Julia?
You know, once we start healing trauma, what I love about that work is every single step we take
Mhm.
towards healing is a step towards more wholeness, more integration, more connections, more connection of parts that have been disconnected because of the stress we live through, more aliveness. We can also tolerate more love because there's just the container, we like to call it the container is bigger. You know, whereas the container, when we live through a lot of traumatic experiences, is like super small. We can tolerate that much stress, but we can also tolerate that much joy. And the more integration that happens, the bigger the container, the more aliveness, the more we can flow with life and what it invites us to, and the more resilience we develop, the more creative we get when there's stress, when there's obstacles. So it's really, I mean, to me, it's really a work back to life.
This is not something a lot of people approach, trauma informed therapists or individuals to reduce trauma. Um, it's more of something people then normally, based upon just what I'm hearing, this trauma is not what they look at. They point at the trauma. They may say that person caused the trauma, but they often don't go back and, as you say, do the work. They often ignore the trauma and don't unearth what is causing them the trauma, developmental or trauma because of different experiences. They just say narcissistic abuse has caused me this trauma and I'm not going to take it anymore. And then they start walking down the street as if it'll never happen to them again. You're saying it can happen to them again
Absolutely.
because they have not done the excavating emotionally dealing with trauma, and their primary caregivers maybe even because they're living off of the wrong lifestyle patterns when it comes to their nervous system.
And you know, it's not when we walk away from a toxic relationship, from an abusive relationship, number one, it's a long journey. Everyone who has tried to walk away, who has walked away, knows it's a long journey. I haven't seen anyone who walked away and next day lived in peace and happily ever after with someone new and not be haunted by their memories or anything like that. That's total Hollywood. It's not happening, not in my experience.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So one is there can come a point where we go like, why the heck did that happen to me? So that is when we can look back into how did I learn love? What was love like
Right.
in my family of origin? And then many have suffered physical violence. Many have suffered whatever. But we also need to work through that. That is a shock trauma, right? And we need to work through that because once your survival is threatened, the body also gets stuck in that high level of energy, and we need to discharge that in order for the body, for the nervous system to relax, for the muscles to relax, for the cortisol levels to drop, for the heart rate to go back to normal, the blood pressure, like everything, you know, everything. As long, this is something I really would like people to understand, as long as we haven't worked through that kind of traumatic response, the body thinks, part of your consciousness believes the threat is still there. And therefore, the body keeps living in that stress response. So
Even if that person or situation is gone and removed, the body will stay that way because the conscious or subconscious is still stuck in that mode.
Exactly. Part of our consciousness gets stuck in that event. It's like being stuck in the movie, just like on that.
Mhm.
So the rest of your body and consciousness kind of lives on, but a part is stuck there in that, and you can feel it when people, for example, speak about what they lived through. You can feel the energy. You can feel if they are very agitated, if they are like totally dissociated and numb. You can sense that.
Mhm.
But that means there's a lot of energy still stored in that, what they have experienced.
Mhm.
And the body still reacts because it has not been discharged, as if the threat was still happening. And that's when people suffer from very high levels of cortisol. That's very typical for survivors of ongoing abuse, for example, or irritable bowel syndrome. All these syndromes, that kind of, it only gets worse and worse and worse and worse, the health. Once we start doing the trauma work, once we can discharge that one event when you were hit, for example, by the abuser,
Mhm.
that one event when you every time we work through a traumatic experience, the body can discharge stress, and immediately all the amygdala doesn't have to fire that much, the fear center is not that much on alert, and it has an immediate effect.
You're highlighting then that even though we may not be in that home with that person, we may not be in the same car or in the same workspace with that person, or more or less, the event in itself and the multiple events we've had with that person are still there.
Yeah.
And we can still be holding and storing all of that because we haven't discharged it.
Yeah.
It is very important that we discharge these things, these events, these circumstances, individuals, and how they affected us. Because if we don't, Julia, you're saying that we literally could be killing ourselves physically.
Yeah, it wreaks havoc on our physical body. It's so easy to understand. Once you get your head around it, there has been a threat, the body goes into alert, high levels of stress, because you want to fight, you try to survive, you try to run away, and you don't get to do neither of that. And that amount of stress is it's not going to
disappear, go anywhere.
It's still there, and that's what needs to be discharged in a safe space, in a safe environment, with a person you feel safe with, ideally with someone who's trained, right? And then the body reacts and goes like, oh, holy shit, whew, finally I can take a breath.
So we're talking, sometimes that's like sleeping for like a whole day, huh? After it finally discharges, the body just like, okay, I've been holding that for a long time and I'm tired. It's like, and I don't know why I keep oversleeping. It's because the body, once it's gotten a chance to do the work, it just wants to release,
Absolutely.
recuperate a little bit, and it's ready to go. It very seldom has to shut down completely for a long period of time. Every person's situation may be different.
It's the body is so grateful for every little bit of stress that we release.
Okay,
But
I have never heard anybody say it. Wait, that was really good. The body is grateful.
Really.
It's like, my goodness, I'm finally done with that. Wow.
And there's people, they have aching muscles. They experience aching muscles for days because they've been like this.
Shoulders up toward the ears, tense in the
And
back, shoulders, everything's tense.
even the muscles that are inside of the body, even the little muscles that we can't control willingly, but they are just tight because when we experience threat, everything goes tight.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's people who gain back their better eyesight because the muscles around the eyeballs start to relax, and then they can see better again. Blood pressure drops. I mean, I've seen all of that.
I've heard that about the eyes. What I have to ask you this: the effects of traumatic experiences vary for each person. The way the body gets rid of traumatic experiences is the same for every person because it needs to be discharged. That's the ultimate thing that the body wants to do. It wants to discharge whatever that traumatic experience is.
So let me try to put that a little more on the spot. We are not discharging the experience because we have lived through the experience, and the experience will always be part of our biography.
Okay.
Okay. And we might feel some sort of grief or some sort of anger or some sort of sadness around that event forever.
Got it.
But what will happen is that the charge, the weight, that sense of it's unbearable, that will lift. And what we discharge is the reaction of our physical body to what happened. That's what we discharge. So we still remember, but I mean, every one of us has that experience. There's memories we have, and they're just kind of complete, and you remember them and nothing changes. But then there's memories, that fight that you had with your mother-in-law, or that ugly discussion you had with your boss, where you still feel that agitation. You see, it's not complete. It's not complete. And just as an example for everyone who listens is, you think you can walk away, and then you get an email from that person. And your heart rate goes up, you get sweaty hands, you go like, whoa, what is he or she up to now? And then it's not done. You're not done. You may have walked away, which is good for your safety, first and super important step, but it doesn't mean that you're done. It doesn't mean that you have healed. It doesn't mean that your boundaries are in place.
Putting up boundaries, doing the healing, doing the discharging are ways to work through the trauma.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the process is complete, because something can take place. You mentioned an email, something could happen. You go to an event and there that person is. And we may end up finding out there's a little bit more that the body needs to process or as it were, discharge, so that we can have a complete healing. Did I say that correctly? Is that right?
Yeah. And the more we discharge, the more the body, we become, the capacity to self-regulate grows. So I'm not saying you need to, for every agitation you experience, you need to run and see a therapist. No. Because at the same time, we realize, oh, I can self-regulate. Okay, that was intense. Okay, that was intense. Let's just resource. Let's just take a moment. And then you can, you can self-regulate, you can discharge, you can come back to center, you can come back to peace of mind. So that's that while we are healing, while we are discharging, while we are coming back to more completeness, we are learning skills on the way, which, for example, are self-regulation and co-regulation. And in just referring to boundaries for a moment, we can only set true boundaries when we feel ourselves. Because I need to feel, no, I don't want that. I don't feel comfortable with that. Otherwise, it's a mental construct. Oh, he or she is not allowed in my house. And that's fine. But when you get a boundary from someone, that's an inside out boundary, you go like, okay, I got that.
I got that. Yeah. Hey, wait. I felt that isn't often what's happening. Like, I didn't just hear you and mentally process it. I felt that boundary coming from you, and I get it. And that's what we need to be delivering. And we can only do that, based upon what you just said, if we feel the boundary and not just mentally construct a boundary and set it up.
Exactly.
Which, anybody can sit down on paper and go like, okay, so I'm not tolerating that anymore, and I'm not tolerating that. That is beneficial, is what you're saying. But we need to go and literally have the boundary we wrote on paper or in our head it needs to connect with our entire body.
It's
So that
like,
we put some feeling behind that boundary.
yeah, or I like to put it the other way around. I like
Okay.
to call it, it's an inside out process.
Okay.
Right? So my mind might suggest I'm not accepting X, Y, Z, and that's fine.
Mm.
But once I feel myself, I go like, no bullshit. And that's when the other person might try to negotiate the boundary once or twice. But then even a narcissist gets it like, oh, they're like,
Okay, I'm out of here because they really mean it this time.
they come back with a
Of
new
course.
trick, but that's when we get it, as you said, we feel it, we get it, because it's non-negotiable. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's smart. Then it's really, it can be put in a very friendly way. But it's like, no thanks.
Yeah.
And it's clear, right?
No.
And I think that's super, especially for survivors of toxic abuse. It's something that is super important to protect themselves, to learn new skills, to protect their kids, to protect their family, their environment, whatever it is.
That's actually where I wanted to ask you before we conclude today, is the narcissistic abuse target. They need to stand their ground, establish boundaries. They need to make sure the trauma comes to an end, that they're not living in a dysregulated state, but they're trying to regulate themselves while they deal with someone who seems to have no boundaries other than to hurt people or to cause problems.
Yeah.
But in order to get to that point of working through trauma, people need resources. They need to know where they can get help from or work through different situations. You and I cannot go to everyone's home or be in everyone's home with this discussion and other things. But what can a person do? What is the importance of having resources that can help a person work through trauma?
One is, as I said, there's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it's just hard to find the right information, right? And to, especially in the beginning, when you have left or when you have realized in which relationship with whomever it was you were, it's overwhelming. There's a lack of orientation, right? But sooner or later you go like, okay, let's see what I can do. Another nuance of resources is that we all have resources in our lives. So saying that, I mean, there's things that we know help us to regulate. That can be doing yoga. That can be going for a walk. That can be sitting with your cat. That can be looking at the sky. So, because I know that therapy is not available for everyone who would actually need it, when we become aware of the resources we have, I have a friend that I can really call. I have a friend that really listens. I have a podcast that helps me see clearly, whatever it is. That is the things we want to go back to in moments of agitation, right? Because that's what you have in your hands. That's what you have right there, right then. Even if you can afford therapy, this might happen in 2 weeks' time, but you are lost in that moment, right? So it's something that everyone can do. It's something that we don't have to pay for. What helps me to regulate, to come down from that high level of stress that is caused when I receive an email, that is caused for parents when we interchange the kids or whatever, right? So how can I prepare myself best with the means at hand? And then therapy is an excellent extra if you can afford it. And I'm going to say that out loud. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's not for the
therapy isn't for the faint-hearted.
No, this whole process
trauma.
of healing from trauma, putting your boundaries in place, and I mean, I believe it's a whole different life that's waiting for you once you start. It's not like you need to work it through for 5 years and then there's a whole new life. No, 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 no. You do the first 2-3 steps and then you already notice the changes and you notice, wow, life looks different. Life appears to be so much kinder. I don't feel threatened so much. You experience the benefits right away. And it's an up and down process. And it's, yeah, I mean, but it's not for the faint-hearted to live with a narcissistic person either. You know, you are incredibly strong already because, you know, you've survived that.
I was going to say, well, the process of working through all of these things may seem a little bit easier because if somebody was living with a troublemaker, with a toxic person, this is going to be a piece of cake. There's a welcome change to work on themselves and make improvements. Resources are available to all of us. You mentioned we need to make sure we utilize them in the moment.
In the moment.
Be humble and work and do whatever we need to do, but also feel willing and okay and humble to reach out and say that we need help from a close friend or someone that we need to talk to.
Absolutely.
When it comes to trauma, I'm looking at something here when trauma has healing is a note that I have here that I wanted to talk to you about. Does trauma provide healing? Or is trauma something we need to heal from? What's your thought?
That's a good question, actually, because you just said something. Does trauma provide healing? And
sometimes I do pretty good without coffee.
Must be one of those days.
No comment. But else, go ahead.
I believe if we have the awareness, which means we got out of, I'm only a victim. It's everyone else's responsibility. Once we get out of that and we realize something must be going on in my life that I don't see yet, and I want to explore, I want to get help to see where I'm dysfunctional. Once we made that shift of, I don't like that word so much, but for lacking a different expression, of taking responsibility for my share, then I do believe that trauma is a huge gateway to healing, because if we weren't suffering, we wouldn't even try to heal. We were like at the beach and like, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, and genius people, excellent therapists, once you ask them, they have gone through a lot of trauma themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it is a gateway, but we need to make that switch. We need to come to that moment where we realize, okay, no. This is happening to me since 50 years. It can't be the world that is, there must be something going on. And I don't like responsibility so much because that would include I can do it differently, which we can't until we see it. But it's just like make that switch. Okay, now I want to know what's going on. I once said to my therapist, I said, I'm not going to leave this office until I know what the crazy hack is going on.
That's right. Order the food, bring the food in, because we're not leaving. Get your blanket out. I'm not leaving here until I figure out why is this continually happening.
Exactly.
I have to agree with you. I've silently, this is going to be the first time I ever said it out loud. I've always believed that trauma is the gateway to getting a measure of healing and understanding of things and ourselves, and the accountability that we may have. We may not be to blame. We may not had a full part in anything, but one thing is for sure, we can be accountable for how we react to situations. We all get faced with so many different types of situations that affect us and our children, because they're watching our reaction to individuals, to how we react to our ex or mate or whatever it may be, to our boss, or how we come home and talk about those things. But you set all of us, uh, definitely personally speaking, in a different direction. This is our second conversation. The first one was dealing with narcissism and narcissistic people, and this one today is about trauma. I find that the way you discuss it, it's done in such a way that it's easy to understand.
Hmm.
You have a way of taking us on a journey about subjects, but
Thank you
then
for
you
that. That's my mission. If that's why my website is called Trauma in a Nutshell, because that was when I started. I was like, I want everyone to understand that. Everyone who's interested, I want to find a language that they understand it. So thank you for saying that.
well, I have to tell you, went to look for individuals that talk about trauma, of course, as you highlighted earlier at the beginning, I can find many people talking about trauma, but it was the way you spoke about it and described it, and you didn't leave yourself off the table. You put yourself on the table as part of the discussion as well, and it made it much easier for people to understand. Then we gave it a really good attempt to do a show together, Instagram live.
We did.
We had many connection issues in that live, but we were able to do it, and many people responded how they appreciated your style.
Mm,
Many
thank you.
people that regularly watch my channel there on Instagram, but I find you refreshing because your personal life and your life as a whole uh, is one that you're willing to share to a measured degree so people can get a better understanding that no one is immune to trauma. But you take us on a really good journey. In what nutshell? Yeah, you should get you a shirt that has a walnut on it or something like that. Something a nutshell, because you literally make it easy for people to process it. Sometimes when people talk about trauma on my shows, I have to continue to repeat what they say and break it down.
Mm.
Uh, I don't really have nothing to do. I had to find things to do when I talk with you. When I do a show, I have to, I have to, because if not, I'll just be sitting here listening to you because it all makes sense. I don't need to repeat it and try to break it down. You break it down so well, Julia. You're
Thank
an
you. I'm very happy
exceptionally
for that.
good person. You're exceptionally good person. Or as my mom and dad would say, you're a good egg. You're a good egg. You're not hey, and you're not scrambled either. You got good you're sound mind, good common sense, as my dad would say. So thank you very much for this today. The next time we are going to get together, we are going to get together another time, and the next time we get together, we're going to talk about something else, and everybody's just got to tune in. But we're going to attempt to do another Instagram live coming up, hopefully on the 28th of this month. And I got to smile just like you're smiling right now
Yeah,
because
right.
we're
Exactly.
going to attempt to do it again because literally, I'm not kidding you. I have people asking, so when are you going to bring her back? And I was going to, we had connection issues. We're going to do a Zoom. They're like, okay, that's fine, but when are you going to bring her? We don't care. We don't care about the Zoom. We want
I don't
to
care
because
about the connection
they
issues.
wanted to they wanted to talk to you. No, I'm just letting you know.
Excellent.
So,
I'm
so
so much looking forward to that.
yeah,
And I
you're duly warned when you come on.
yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. Right now, I say to you, enjoy the rest of your evening. Say hello to your beautiful daughter who's in prison right now because she can't come out. She can't come out because we're doing the show. And it's this that old man in California. It's my fault, my accountability for
I heard
keeping.
her laugh out loud just now.
Okay.
So prison can't
Well,
be too bad right
hopefully,
now.
I was going to say, hopefully that's a good noise. But anyhow, thank you very much, Julia. It's been a pleasure, like usual. And for everyone else that's listening to this, please like, comment, share, follow, all the above to Julia. You cannot miss her. Trauma in a Nutshell on Instagram if you need to talk with her. But more
Absolutely.
importantly, please, before we go, you have a program. What can people avail themselves when they go to your website? And what is your website? Go ahead.
Okay, my website is also traumainanutshell.com. And if you're starting out to educate yourself on narcissism, there's a 1-hour masterclass on narcissism. And I break it down, I hope, easy, understandable. What is narcissism? What are the effects? What is the prospect on healing? Yeah, and you get it with an infographic. I heard from people that it helps them. Look out for that on my website. And then in my bio on Instagram, you'll find a wait list. You'll find a link to a wait list for the upcoming 5-week course, which will start in approximately a month. And it's called Life After the Narcissist. And it will provide you with a lot of understanding, with a lot of, also it will be trauma informed. So what we spoke about today will be part of the course. So get your name on the wait list. It doesn't mean you're registered, but it means you will receive the information in due time.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. It's been fun. I appreciate it.
Yep.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Ciao.